The auction block stood in the center of Seattle's muddy Main Street, and Victoria Ramsey knew this was the moment her life would either end or somehow transform into something even worse than the hell she had already endured. It was 1876, and the rain dripped steadily from the wooden overhang above her head as men gathered in a semicircle, their eyes assessing her like cattle at market. Her father's debts had brought her here, sold off to settle gambling losses and unpaid loans that had nothing to do with her but everything to do with her future. The auctioneer, a stout man with tobacco-stained teeth, grabbed her arm and pulled her forward into the fading afternoon light. "Gentlemen, we have here Miss Victoria Ramsey, age 22, healthy and strong," the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying over the sound of rain pattering against the dirt. "Her father owes considerable sums, and she is to be sold as an indentured servant to the highest bidder. The contract is for 7 years, with all rights transferring to the purchaser." Victoria kept her eyes down, her dark hair plastered against her face from the rain. Her dress, once a respectable calico print, was now faded and worn. She could feel the weight of humiliation settling over her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Her hands trembled, but she clenched them into fists to hide the fear coursing through her veins. "I will start the bidding at $50, the auctioneer called out. "75, a voice slurred from the front of the crowd. Victoria's stomach dropped. She recognized that voice. Silas Morton, the town's most notorious drunkard, stood swaying near the auction block. His clothes were stained with whiskey and dirt, his face bloated and red from years of drinking. He was known for his violent temper and had been through 3 wives already, though no one spoke openly about what had happened to them. Rumors swirled that they had all left him, but the darkness in his eyes suggested a more sinister truth. $75 to Mr. Morton, the auctioneer said, though his tone carried a hint of distaste. Victoria's heart pounded. 7 years with Silas Morton would be a death sentence, slow and painful. She had heard the stories whispered by the women in town, the bruises they claimed to have seen on his last wife before she disappeared. Her breathing became shallow, and she felt the world starting to spin. $100. The new voice cut through the crowd like a knife, strong and clear. Victoria looked up despite herself, searching for the source. A man stepped forward from the back of the gathered crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather duster that had seen better days. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw and the determination in his eyes. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew how to handle himself, and the crowd parted for him naturally. $100, he repeated, his gaze fixed on the auctioneer, not on her. Silas Morton spun around, nearly losing his balance. "Who the hell are you?" "Ethan Thorne," the man replied evenly. "And I am bidding." $125, Silas spat out, his face growing redder. $200, Ethan countered without hesitation. A murmur ran through the crowd. $200 was a substantial sum, far more than anyone would typically pay for an indentured servant, even for 7 years. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose, and he looked between the 2 men with renewed interest. "This is robbery," Silas shouted, stumbling forward. "You are trying to steal what is rightfully mine." "Nothing is yours until the gavel falls," Ethan said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that suggested he was not a man to be trifled with. $200 stands. Silas looked around wildly, as if expecting someone to support him, but the crowd remained silent. Everyone knew he was a mean drunk, and few had sympathy for him. He fumbled in his pockets, his hands shaking with rage and inebriation. 210, he finally managed, though his voice wavered. 300. The crowd gasped collectively. $300 was an extraordinary sum. Victoria stared at this stranger, this Ethan Thorne, trying to understand why he would spend so much money on her. He did not look like a wealthy man. His clothes, though well-maintained, were those of a working cowboy, someone who earned his living through hard labor and long days on horseback. Silas's face had gone from red to purple. He swayed on his feet, clearly trying to calculate if he had enough money to continue bidding. Finally, he let out a string of curses that made several women in the crowd cover their ears. "You will regret this, Thorne," he snarled. "Mark my words." 300 going once, the auctioneer called out quickly, clearly eager to conclude the sale before violence erupted. 300 going twice. He paused, looking around the crowd one final time. "Sold to Mr. Ethan Thorne for $300. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to seal Victoria's fate. She did not know whether to feel relief or terror. She had been saved from Silas Morton, but what did this stranger want with her? Men did not spend that kind of money without expecting something in return. Ethan stepped up to the auction block and counted out the money in clean bills, handing them to the auctioneer. The official paperwork was signed, transferring Victoria's 7-year indenture contract to Ethan Thorne. Through it all, Ethan did not look at her directly, as if she were simply a transaction to be completed. When everything was finalized, Ethan finally turned to face her. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds over the Pacific, and there was something in them she had not expected: kindness. He reached up and offered her his hand to help her down from the auction block. Victoria hesitated for a moment before taking it. His hand was rough with calluses but warm and steady. He helped her down with surprising gentleness, then immediately released her hand and stepped back, maintaining a respectful distance. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let us get out of this rain." He led her away from the dispersing crowd toward a horse tied at the nearby hitching post. It was a sturdy bay gelding, well cared for despite the weather. Ethan untied the reins and then turned to her again. "Can you ride?" he asked. Victoria nodded. She had grown up on a small farm before her father's gambling had destroyed everything. Riding had been one of the few joys of her childhood. "Good," Ethan said. He swung up into the saddle with practiced ease and then reached down for her. "Take my hand." Victoria placed her hand in his, and he pulled her up behind him effortlessly. She settled onto the horse's back, acutely aware of how close she was to this stranger. She had no choice but to hold onto his waist as he urged the horse forward, guiding them away from the town center and toward the outskirts of Seattle. They rode in silence for several minutes, the rain continuing to fall steadily. Victoria's mind raced with questions, but fear kept her silent. Finally, Ethan guided the horse off the main road and down a smaller path that led toward a modest cabin set back among the pine trees. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the building, though simple, appeared well maintained. Ethan dismounted and then helped Victoria down. He led the horse to a small stable beside the cabin, where another horse, a gray mare, stood munching hay contentedly. After unsaddling the bay and making sure both horses were comfortable, Ethan finally turned his full attention to Victoria. "We need to talk," he said, gesturing toward the cabin. "Inside, where it is warm." Victoria followed him to the cabin door, her heart pounding. The interior was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace crackling with warmth, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a modest kitchen area, and a single bedroom visible through an open doorway. Everything was orderly and practical, the home of a man who lived alone and took care of his space. Ethan removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door, then shrugged out of his wet duster. Underneath, he wore a simple cotton shirt and vest, both faded from washing but clean. He was younger than Victoria had initially thought, probably no more than 25 or 26, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends and a face that would have been handsome if not for the serious expression he wore. "Sit down," he said, pulling out one of the chairs for her. "Please." Victoria sat, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for whatever came next. Ethan moved to the fireplace and added another log, then stood with his back to the flames, looking down at her. "I imagine you have questions," he began. "Why did you buy my contract?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "I bought your contract because I could not stand by and watch Silas Morton destroy another life. I have seen what he does to people, especially women. My sister." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "My sister was his second wife. She died 3 years ago under circumstances that were never fully explained. The town did nothing because he had money and influence back then before he drank it all away." Victoria's breath caught. "I am sorry." "So am I," Ethan said, his voice rough with old pain. "When I heard they were auctioning you off and saw him circling like a vulture, I knew I had to do something. I could not let it happen again." "But $300, Victoria said. "That is a fortune." "I cannot possibly be worth that much to you as a servant." "You are not my servant," Ethan said firmly. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Victoria recognized it as the indenture contract. Without ceremony, Ethan walked to the fireplace and tossed it into the flames. They both watched as the paper caught fire, curling and blackening until it was nothing but ash. Victoria stared in shock. "What did you just do?" "I set you free," Ethan said simply. "You are not indentured to me or anyone else. You are your own person, free to do as you wish." "I do not understand," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "You spent $300 just to set me free. Why? You do not know me. You owe me nothing." Ethan returned to stand before her, his expression serious but gentle. "Because it was the right thing to do. No person should be bought and sold like property. My sister never had anyone to help her when she needed it most. Maybe if someone had stepped in, she would still be alive. I cannot change the past, but I could help you. So I did." Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes, blurring her vision. In all her life, no one had ever done something so selfless for her. Her father had gambled away everything, including her future, without a second thought. Her mother had died when Victoria was young, and she had no other family. The world had taught her that people only looked out for themselves, that kindness always came with a price. But here was this stranger, this cowboy, who had given up a small fortune simply because it was the right thing to do. "I do not know what to say," she whispered, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "You do not have to say anything," Ethan replied. He moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out supplies. "You are wet and cold, and I would wager you have not eaten properly in days. Let me make you something warm." Victoria watched as he worked, moving efficiently through the small kitchen. He put a kettle on to boil and began preparing a simple stew with vegetables and dried beef. His movements were practiced, the routine of a man who had been taking care of himself for a long time. "The rain should clear by tomorrow," Ethan said as he worked, his tone conversational, clearly trying to put her at ease. "Seattle gets a lot of rain, but the summers are usually mild." "Have you lived here long?" "About 2 years," Victoria said, finding her voice. "My father moved us here from Wyoming after my mother died. He thought he could start over, make a new life. Instead, he found the gambling halls and drank away everything we had." "Where is he now?" Ethan asked, though his tone suggested he might already know the answer. "He died 3 months ago," Victoria said flatly. He collapsed in the street outside a saloon. The doctor said his liver had given out. The debts he left behind were substantial, and I had no way to pay them. The creditors decided to sell my labor contract to recover their losses. I am sorry you went through that, Ethan said, glancing at her with genuine sympathy. No one should have to bear the consequences of another person's failures, especially not a parent's. The kettle began to whistle, and Ethan poured hot water into 2 tin cups, adding what looked like dried herbs for tea. He brought one to Victoria, and she accepted it gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warm metal. "Thank you," she said softly. They sat in comfortable silence while Ethan finished preparing the stew. When it was ready, he served her a generous portion in a wooden bowl with a chunk of bread. Victoria realized just how hungry she was. She had barely eaten in days, too anxious about the auction to have any appetite. Now, with the immediate danger past and warmth seeping back into her bones, her body demanded fuel. Ethan sat across from her with his own bowl, and they ate together. Victoria kept sneaking glances at him, trying to understand this man who had upended her life in the most unexpected way. He had a quiet strength about him, a calmness that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin and with his choices. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked after a while, breaking the silence. "Do you have anywhere to go? Family or friends who might take you in?" Victoria shook her head. "No. I have no one. I suppose I will need to find work, save up enough money to get by." "Work is not easy to come by for a woman alone," Ethan said carefully. "Especially in a town like Seattle where most respectable positions require references or connections. And after today, with your father's debts and the auction, some folks might look at you differently." Victoria knew he was right. The stigma of being sold at auction would follow her. Many would assume she had done something to deserve it, or worse, that she was now somehow tainted goods. Finding employment would be difficult, and finding safe employment nearly impossible. "I will manage," she said, though the confidence in her voice was hollow. Ethan set down his spoon and leaned forward slightly. "I have a proposition for you if you will hear it. And before you answer, I want you to know there are no strings attached. You are free regardless of what you decide." Victoria's guard went up immediately. "What kind of proposition?" "I own a small ranch about 10 miles outside of town," Ethan explained. "It is nothing fancy, just enough land for cattle and horses. I have been managing it alone since my sister died, and honestly, it is more than one person can handle properly. I need help with the daily tasks, cooking, mending, keeping the place running while I handle the livestock and the heavier work. In exchange, I would offer you room and board, plus a fair wage. You would have your own space, complete privacy, and the freedom to leave whenever you wish. No contract, no obligations beyond honest work for honest pay." Victoria studied his face, looking for any hint of deception or ulterior motive. She had learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. But Ethan's expression remained open and sincere. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked. "You have already spent a fortune to free me. Why go further?" "Because I could use the help," Ethan said simply. "And because you need a safe place to land while you figure out your next steps. Maybe it works out and you stay for a while. Maybe you decide to move on after a few weeks. Either way, you would have a chance to get back on your feet without having to worry about Silas Morton or anyone else who might try to take advantage of your situation." Victoria felt the tears threatening again. She blinked them back, trying to maintain some composure. "I am not a charity case." "I am not offering charity," Ethan said firmly. "I am offering employment. There is a difference. I need help and you need work. It is a fair exchange." Victoria took a deep breath, weighing her options. She could refuse his offer, strike out on her own and hope to find something in Seattle. But the reality was grim. With no money, no references, and the shame of the auction hanging over her, her prospects were bleak. She might end up in an even worse situation than before. Or she could accept Ethan's offer, take the chance that he was genuinely as honorable as he seemed, and have a safe place to stay while she built up some savings and figured out her future. "How long would you want me to stay?" she asked. "As long as it suits both of us," Ethan replied. "Like I said, no contracts. If you want to leave tomorrow, you can. If you want to stay for a year, that works too. I believe in giving people their freedom to choose." Victoria made her decision. "All right, I will take your offer. But I want to be clear. This is strictly an employer and employee arrangement. I will work hard and earn my keep, but nothing more." "Absolutely," Ethan agreed immediately. "You have my word as a gentleman that I will treat you with complete respect. Your privacy and safety are guaranteed." They shook hands across the table, sealing the agreement. Victoria felt a small measure of relief settle over her. It was not a perfect solution, but it was far better than anything else available to her. "You can stay here tonight," Ethan said, standing and collecting their empty bowls. "I will sleep in the stable with the horses. Tomorrow we will head out to the ranch and get you settled properly." "You do not have to sleep in the stable," Victoria protested. "This is your home." "The stable is dry and comfortable enough," Ethan assured her. "Besides, you need a good night's rest in a real bed. You have been through an ordeal. Take the bedroom. There are clean blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed, and you should find everything you need." Victoria wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was catching up with her. The stress of the past weeks, culminating in the terror of the auction, had drained her completely. The thought of sleeping in a real bed, safe and warm, was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "Just take care of yourself," Ethan said with a slight smile, the first she had seen from him. It softened his features and made him look younger, less burdened. "That is payment enough." He showed her to the bedroom, pointed out the blankets and a clean nightshirt she could use, and then excused himself. Victoria heard him moving around the main room for a few minutes before the cabin door opened and closed, and she was alone. She changed into the nightshirt, which was far too large for her but clean and soft from many washings. The bed was simple but comfortable, with a real mattress stuffed with straw and feathers. Victoria climbed under the blankets and felt the tension slowly draining from her body. For the first time in months, she felt safe. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts were of the mysterious cowboy who had saved her life for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a small flicker of hope. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. Victoria woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. She sat up, noting that the rain had stopped and the day promised to be clearer. She could hear movement outside, the soft sounds of someone tending to animals. Victoria dressed quickly in her old calico dress, wishing she had something cleaner to wear. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found the cabin empty but a plate of bread and cheese left on the table along with a cup of water. A note written in neat handwriting said, "Eat something. I am with the horses. Join me when you are ready." She ate the simple breakfast, appreciating the thoughtfulness. Through the window, she could see Ethan in the stable area, brushing down one of the horses with long, steady strokes. He had already been up for a while, clearly an early riser accustomed to ranch work. Victoria finished eating, washed her face in the basin Ethan had left out, and then headed outside. The morning air was crisp and fresh after the rain, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Ethan looked up as she approached, offering a brief nod of greeting. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I have in months," Victoria admitted. "Thank you for the breakfast." "You are welcome. We should head out to the ranch soon if you are ready. It is about a 2-hour ride and I want to get there before afternoon." "I am ready whenever you are." Ethan finished with the horse and then saddled both animals. He helped Victoria mount the gray mare, who seemed calm and well-trained, before swinging up onto his bay gelding. They set off at an easy pace, leaving Seattle behind and heading into the surrounding countryside. The landscape was beautiful, with dense forests of evergreens giving way occasionally to open meadows. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer season. Victoria had not spent much time outside of Seattle since arriving, and she found herself appreciating the wild beauty of Washington Territory. "It is lovely out here," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "It is," Ethan agreed. "That is why I settled here. After my sister died, I needed to get away from town, from the memories. I found this land for sale and used the money I had saved from working cattle drives. It is not much, but it is mine and it is peaceful." "How long have you had the ranch?" "Almost 2 years now. I have about 50 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and enough land to support them. I sell beef and horses to the army and to some of the logging camps in the area. It is steady work, and it pays well enough to get by." Victoria could hear the pride in his voice when he talked about his ranch. It was clear this was more than just property to him. It was his independence, his fresh start after tragedy. They rode on, occasionally exchanging comments about the scenery or the wildlife they spotted. Ethan pointed out a deer at the edge of the forest, and they saw an eagle soaring overhead. Despite the circumstances that had brought them together, Victoria found herself relaxing in his presence. There was something inherently trustworthy about Ethan Thorne. He did not try to fill every silence with meaningless chatter, and he seemed content to let her process everything at her own pace. After about 2 hours, just as Ethan had predicted, they crested a small hill and Victoria saw the ranch spread out below them. It was nestled in a valley with a small creek running through it, the water glinting in the sunlight. The main house was a solid log structure, larger than the cabin in Seattle, with a wide porch across the front. There was a proper barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distant pastures, and horses moved lazily in one of the nearer enclosures. "This is your ranch?" Victoria asked, unable to hide her surprise. She had expected something far more modest. "This is it," Ethan confirmed. "Home sweet home." As they rode down toward the house, Victoria noticed how well maintained everything was. The fences were sturdy, the buildings in good repair, and the land itself looked healthy and well managed. Ethan clearly took his responsibilities seriously. He helped her dismount near the house, and then led both horses to the barn to unsaddle them. Victoria followed, looking around with growing appreciation for what he had built here. Inside the barn, everything was organized and clean, with tack hanging neatly on the walls and fresh hay in the stalls. "Let me show you the house," Ethan said after the horses were settled. "You can choose which room you would like." The interior of the ranch house was even more impressive than the exterior. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and windows that let in plenty of natural light. The kitchen area was well equipped, and there were 3 separate bedrooms, each modest but private. "I use that one," Ethan said, pointing to the room on the far left. "The other 2 are empty. You can have whichever you prefer. There is a wash house out back with a pump for water, and I have been meaning to set up a proper bathing area but have not gotten around to it. For now, We heat water on the stove and use the old copper tub. Victoria chose the middle bedroom, which had a window overlooking the creek and the mountains beyond. It was simply furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table, but it was clean and private, and the view was breathtaking. "It is perfect," she said sincerely. "I am glad you like it. Unfortunately, I do not have much in the way of women's clothing, but there is a general store about 5 miles from here. We can ride over there tomorrow and get you some proper things to wear. For now, I might have an old shirt and some trousers that you can wear for working around the ranch if you do not mind the impropriety." Victoria almost laughed. After being sold at auction like livestock, the impropriety of wearing men's trousers seemed trivial. "I think that would be practical." "Thank you." Ethan showed her the rest of the ranch, explaining the daily routine and what needed to be done. He had a hired hand who came by 3 times a week to help with the heavier work, but otherwise, Ethan managed everything himself. Victoria could see immediately that he had not been exaggerating when he said he needed help. There was plenty of work for 2 people, from cooking and cleaning to tending the garden, caring for the chickens, and helping with the horses. They spent the rest of the day settling into a routine. Victoria insisted on preparing dinner, using the supplies in the well-stocked pantry to make a hearty meal of fried chicken, biscuits, and vegetables from the garden. Ethan seemed genuinely appreciative, admitting that his own cooking skills were limited to basic survival fare. As they ate dinner that evening, Victoria found herself studying Ethan more closely. In the warm light of the house, with his guard slightly lowered, she could see the toll that grief and hard work had taken on him. There were shadows under his eyes, and his hands bore the calluses and small scars of a man who worked with his hands every day. Yet there was also a quiet dignity to him, a fundamental decency that shone through in everything he did. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said carefully. "Of course." "When you saw me at the auction, did you know who I was? Had you seen me before?" Ethan shook his head. "No. I had come into town for supplies and heard about the auction. I was not even planning to attend, but curiosity got the better of me. When I saw Silas Morton there, looking at you like you were his next victim, something in me snapped. I could not let it happen again. You risked a lot for a stranger." "Maybe," Ethan acknowledged, "but I would not have been able to live with myself if I had walked away. My sister's death haunts me every day. I keep thinking that if I had been there, if I had paid more attention to the signs, maybe I could have saved her. I cannot bring her back, but I could help you." It seemed like the universe was giving me a chance to make things right, even if it was too late for her. Victoria reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was a bold gesture, but she felt compelled to offer some comfort. "Your sister was lucky to have a brother who cared so much about her, and I am lucky that you were there yesterday. I know I have said it before, but thank you, Ethan, truly." Ethan looked down at their hands, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes, an emotion Victoria could not quite name. Then he gently withdrew his hand and stood, collecting their plates. "We both have early mornings ahead," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a full day." Victoria recognized the deflection for what it was. Ethan was not comfortable with gratitude or emotional intimacy. She suspected he had been alone for so long that he had forgotten how to accept kindness in return. She decided not to push, instead helping him clean up the dinner dishes before retiring to her room. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the crickets chirping and the distant lowing of cattle, Victoria thought about the strange turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she had been standing on an auction block, facing a future that filled her with dread. Now she was in a comfortable bed, in a beautiful place, working for a man who had asked nothing of her except honest work. She found herself wondering about Ethan, about the pain he carried, and the walls he had built around himself. There was more to his story, she sensed, more about his sister and what had happened. But she also understood that trust had to be earned, and wounds that deep did not heal quickly. For now, she would focus on proving herself as a capable worker and try to repay his kindness through her actions. The days began to fall into a comfortable rhythm. Victoria woke early each morning, prepared breakfast for both of them, and then set about her tasks while Ethan went out to tend the cattle and horses. She cleaned the house, tended the garden, fed the chickens, and collected eggs. In the afternoons, she would often help Ethan with the horses, learning how to groom them properly and assist with basic training. True to his word, Ethan took her to the general store and provided her with a modest but practical wardrobe. She now had several proper dresses for everyday wear, sturdy boots, a warm coat for the coming winter, and yes, even a pair of trousers and work shirts for the more physical ranch tasks. The storekeeper had given her a curious look when they came in together, but Ethan's steady presence and respectful demeanor made it clear their arrangement was proper. As the weeks passed, Victoria found herself settling into ranch life with surprising ease. The work was hard, but it was honest and satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. She could see the results of her efforts in the well-tended garden, the tidy house, and the healthy animals. More than that, she felt useful and valued. Ethan proved to be an easy person to work with. He was patient when teaching her new skills, generous with praise when she did something well, and always respectful of her space and privacy. They fell into easy conversations over meals, talking about everything from the weather and ranch work to books they had read and places they had seen. Victoria learned that Ethan had traveled extensively in his younger years, working cattle drives from Texas to Montana, before settling in Washington Territory. She also learned more about his sister, Elizabeth, though Ethan only spoke of her in small doses, as if the memories were still too painful to revisit at length. Elizabeth had been 3 years younger than Ethan, and they had been close growing up. When their parents died of influenza, Ethan had taken on the responsibility of caring for her. He had been working a cattle drive when Elizabeth met Silas Morton. By the time Ethan returned, they were already married. "I should have been there," Ethan said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I should have seen what kind of man he was and stopped her." "You cannot blame yourself for her choices," Victoria said gently. "She was an adult. She made her own decision." "A decision influenced by his lies and manipulation," Ethan replied bitterly. "He was different back then, or at least he presented himself that way. He had money, property, and a respectable position in town. Elizabeth thought she was making a good match. By the time I realized what was happening, by the time I saw the bruises and the fear in her eyes, she was already trapped. She was too ashamed to ask for help, and I was too caught up in my own life to push harder." "What happened to her?" Victoria asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. Ethan was silent for a long time, staring out at the darkening sky. The official story was that she fell down the stairs and broke her neck. Silas claimed it was an accident, that she had been drinking and lost her balance. But Elizabeth never drank, and those stairs were not steep enough to cause that kind of injury. I tried to get the sheriff to investigate, but Silas had friends in high places back then. They ruled it an accident, and that was the end of it. "I am so sorry," Victoria said, feeling the weight of his grief. "That must have been unbearable." "It was," Ethan admitted. "For a long time I was consumed by guilt and rage. I wanted revenge, wanted to make Silas pay for what he had done. but I knew that path would only destroy me too. So I channeled everything into building this ranch, creating something good out of all that pain. It does not bring Elizabeth back, but it helps me feel like her death meant something, like I learned from my failure to protect her. Victoria understood now why Ethan had been willing to spend so much money to save her from Silas. She was not just a stranger in need. She was his chance at redemption, his opportunity to do for her what he had failed to do for his sister. The realization filled her with both sadness and gratitude. "You did protect me," she said softly. "You saved my life, Ethan. Elizabeth would be proud of you." Ethan turned to look at her, and in the fading light, Victoria saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope that maybe she was right. "I hope so," he said quietly. Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of their connection that went beyond employer and employee. Victoria felt it like a physical presence, a warmth that spread through her chest. She was beginning to care for this man, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because of who he was. His kindness, his integrity, his strength tempered with gentleness. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. She had not come here looking for romance. She had been focused on survival, on rebuilding her life and regaining her independence. But her heart, it seemed, had other ideas. As summer gave way to early autumn, Victoria and Ethan continued to grow closer. They worked side by side during the day and spent their evenings talking on the porch or reading by the fireplace. Victoria learned that Ethan had a dry sense of humor and a sharp intelligence that he often hid behind his quiet demeanor. He, in turn, discovered that Victoria was far stronger and more resilient than her gentle appearance suggested. One afternoon in late September, Victoria was in the kitchen preparing preserves from the last of the summer fruits when she heard raised voices outside. She looked through the window and saw Ethan confronting a man on horseback. Even from a distance, she recognized the bloated, red face of Silas Morton. Her heart began to race. She moved to the door, staying just inside but close enough to hear what was being said. "Get off my property, Silas," Ethan was saying, his voice hard as iron. "I want what is mine," Silas slurred, clearly drunk despite the early hour. "You stole that girl from me, Thorne. She was rightfully mine." "She was never yours," Ethan replied, "and she never will be. Now leave before I make you leave." "You think you are so righteous," Silas spat. "Just like you thought you were better than me when Elizabeth was alive. Well, look where that got her. 6 feet under while you play hero to another whore." Ethan moved faster than Victoria would have thought possible. One moment he was standing several feet from Silas's horse, and the next he had grabbed the man by the front of his shirt and hauled him out of the saddle. Silas hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him. "You do not speak about my sister," Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And you do not speak about Victoria. She is worth 100 of you." Silas scrambled backward in the dirt, his bravado evaporating in the face of Ethan's controlled fury. "This is not over, Thorne. Mark my words." "Yes, it is," Ethan said. "If you come near this ranch again, if you even look in Victoria's direction, I will make sure the whole town knows exactly what kind of man you are. I have been gathering evidence about what happened to Elizabeth, and I have found others willing to testify about what you have done. Push me, and I will bury you." It was a bluff, Victoria suspected, but it was an effective one. Silas's face went pale and he struggled to his feet, stumbling toward his horse. He mounted clumsily and wheeled the animal around. "You will regret this," he called back, but his voice lacked conviction. "The only regret I have is not stopping you sooner," Ethan replied. They watched as Silas rode away, his horse moving at an unsteady canter. When he was finally out of sight, Ethan's shoulders sagged slightly, the adrenaline clearly draining from his system. He turned and saw Victoria standing in the doorway. "How much of that did you hear?" he asked. "Enough," Victoria said. She stepped out onto the porch, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Thank you for defending me, and for standing up to him about Elizabeth." "I meant what I said," Ethan replied, walking toward her. "You are worth defending, Victoria. Never doubt that." Victoria felt tears prickling at her eyes again. It seemed she cried more now than she had in years, but they were different tears than before. These were tears of relief, of being valued, of feeling safe for the first time in so long. "I do not know what I did to deserve your kindness," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You do not have to deserve kindness," Ethan said gently. He reached out and with great hesitancy brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Kindness should be freely given, not earned." The touch was brief, but it sent electricity through Victoria's entire body. She looked up at him, seeing her own conflicted emotions reflected in his eyes. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken feelings. Ethan stepped back quickly, as if realizing he had crossed a line. "I should get back to work," he said, his voice slightly rough. "The fence in the east pasture needs mending." "Ethan, wait," Victoria said, reaching out to touch his arm. "We need to talk about this." "About what?" he asked, though they both knew exactly what she meant. "About whatever is happening between us. I cannot keep pretending I do not feel it." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering his thoughts. When he opened them, he looked pained. "Victoria, you do not owe me anything. I do not want you to feel obligated to me because I helped you. That is not what I want." "That is not what this is," Victoria said firmly. "Yes, I am grateful to you. How could I not be? But what I am feeling now, it is something more than gratitude. I care about you, Ethan. These past months, getting to know you, seeing the kind of man you are, I have developed feelings that have nothing to do with obligation." "You have been through a trauma," Ethan said, though his voice wavered. "Sometimes people confuse gratitude with other emotions. Give it time. You will see things more clearly eventually." "I see things perfectly clearly right now," Victoria insisted. "I know my own heart, Ethan, and I know that what I feel for you is real." Ethan looked torn, clearly wanting to believe her but afraid to hope. "I care about you too," he finally admitted. "More than I should, more than is probably wise. But I do not want to take advantage of the situation. You came here vulnerable and in need of help. I would never forgive myself if I exploited that." Victoria stepped closer to him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You are not exploiting anything. I am a grown woman capable of making my own choices. And I choose to be honest with you about how I feel. What you do with that information is up to you." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the tension between them almost tangible. Victoria could see the battle playing out in Ethan's expression, his desire warring with his principles. Finally, slowly, Ethan raised his hand and cupped her cheek, his touch gentle and reverent. "You are an extraordinary woman, Victoria Ramsey," he said softly. "I think I started falling for you the moment you took my hand and let me help you down from that auction block." "Then stop fighting it," Victoria whispered. "Let yourself feel what you feel. We both deserve that much." Ethan leaned down, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to change her mind. But Victoria did not move except to rise up slightly on her toes, meeting him halfway. Their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking the fragile moment. Then something ignited between them, and the kiss deepened. Ethan's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Victoria melted into his embrace. It felt like coming home, like finding something she had not even realized she was searching for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Victoria saw that the shadows in Ethan's eyes had lifted, replaced by something that looked like joy. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted, his voice husky. "So have I," Victoria said, smiling up at him. "What took you so long?" Ethan laughed, a genuine sound of happiness that Victoria had rarely heard from him. "I was trying to be noble and honorable." "You are noble and honorable," Victoria assured him, "but you are also allowed to be happy." "I am beginning to remember what that feels like," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Thanks to you." From that day forward, their relationship changed in the most wonderful way. They were no longer just employer and employee or even just friends. They were courting, taking the time to truly know each other as potential partners. Ethan was attentive and affectionate, always respectful but no longer afraid to show his feelings. Victoria bloomed under his care, her confidence growing as she realized she was loved not for what she could provide but for who she was. The autumn deepened, bringing crisp days and cold nights. Victoria and Ethan worked together to prepare the ranch for winter, storing hay for the livestock, preserving food, and making sure all the buildings were weatherproof. In the evenings, they would sit close together by the fire, Ethan's arm around Victoria's shoulders, talking about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the ranch," Ethan said one night. "Maybe double the herd, add more horses. There is good money in supplying the army, and I think we could build something really substantial here." "We?" Victoria asked, her heart skipping a beat at the pronoun. Ethan turned to look at her, his expression serious but tender. "Victoria, I know it has only been a few months, but I cannot imagine my future without you in it. I want to build a life with you if you will have me. I want this to be our ranch, our home, our future." Victoria felt tears of happiness welling up. "Are you asking me to marry you, Ethan Thorne?" "I am," Ethan said, taking both her hands in his. "I know I should probably wait longer, court you properly, do all the things a gentleman is supposed to do, but life is too short and too uncertain to waste time. I love you, Victoria. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing there in the rain, so brave and strong even when you were terrified. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Ethan. You saved my life in more ways than one, and I cannot imagine spending it with anyone else." Ethan pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that took her breath away. When they finally parted, both of them were smiling so widely it hurt. "When?" Victoria asked. "When should we marry?" "As soon as you want," Ethan replied. "Tomorrow, next week, next month, I will leave that up to you." "Let us do it properly," Victoria said. "I want a real wedding, small but meaningful, maybe in a few weeks. That will give us time to make arrangements and invite the few people we care about." "That sounds perfect," Ethan agreed. They spent the next weeks in a flurry of preparation. Ethan's hired hand, a kind older man named Samuel who had known Elizabeth, offered to stand up as Ethan's best man. Victoria had become friendly with the woman who ran the general store, and she agreed to serve as Victoria's matron of honor. The local pastor, a practical man who asked no difficult questions about their unconventional courtship, agreed to perform the ceremony at the small church in town. Victoria used some of the wages Ethan had paid her to purchase fabric and sewed herself a simple but elegant wedding dress in cream-colored cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan bought a new suit, the first he had owned in years, and got his hair properly cut for the occasion. The night before the wedding, as was traditional, they stayed in separate locations. Ethan remained at the ranch while Victoria stayed in town with her new friend from the general store. It felt strange to be apart after so many months of living under the same roof, but it also built anticipation for the following day. The wedding took place on a bright November morning with clear skies and crisp air. The small church was decorated with late-blooming flowers and autumn leaves. There were only a handful of guests, but they were all people who genuinely cared about the couple and wished them well. When Victoria walked down the aisle on Samuel's arm, since she had no father to give her away, she saw Ethan waiting at the altar and thought her heart might burst with happiness. He looked handsome in his new suit, but more than that, he looked at her with such love and devotion that she felt like the most cherished woman in the world. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They exchanged vows promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and told Ethan he could kiss his bride, Ethan swept Victoria into his arms and kissed her deeply, to the applause and laughter of their small audience. The reception was held at the ranch, with Samuel and a few of the neighboring ranchers bringing food and drink to celebrate. There was music and dancing, and for the first time in years, the ranch house was filled with joy and laughter. Victoria danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling as if she were living in a dream. When the guests finally departed and they were alone, Ethan carried Victoria over the threshold of their bedroom, a tradition that made her laugh with delight. He set her down gently, and they stood facing each other, suddenly shy despite all they had been through together. "I love you, Mrs. Thorne," Ethan said softly, reaching up to remove the pins from her hair, letting it fall in dark waves around her shoulders. "I love you too, Mr. Thorne," Victoria replied, her hands going to the buttons of his shirt. Their wedding night was everything Victoria had hoped for and more. Ethan was tender and patient, attentive to her needs and responses. They came together with love and passion, sealing their union in the most intimate way possible. Afterward, they lay entwined in each other's arms, talking softly about their hopes and dreams until they finally drifted off to sleep. The winter months were challenging, as winters always are in the mountains, but Victoria and Ethan faced them together. The ranch was snowed in for weeks at a time, but they had prepared well and had everything they needed. The isolation gave them time to truly settle into married life, to learn each other's rhythms and habits, to build the foundation of their partnership. Victoria discovered that she was pregnant in early spring, and the joy on Ethan's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. He became even more protective and attentive, always making sure she did not overwork herself and was well fed and comfortable. "I want this child to know how much they are loved," Ethan said one evening, his hand resting gently on Victoria's growing belly. "I want them to grow up feeling safe and cherished, the way every child should." "They will," Victoria assured him. "With you as their father, how could they not?" Throughout her pregnancy, Ethan doted on her. He took over all the heavy work around the ranch and insisted she rest more. He would sit with her in the evenings, reading aloud from books or telling her stories from his cattle-driving days. He talked to her belly, telling their unborn child about the ranch and all the adventures they would have together. In October, almost exactly 1 year after their wedding, Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The labor was long and difficult, but when it was over and Ethan placed their daughter in her arms for the first time, Victoria felt a completeness she had never known was possible. "She is perfect," Ethan whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his daughter. "Absolutely perfect." They named her Elizabeth Grace after Ethan's sister and in recognition of the grace that had brought them together. Little Elizabeth, or Lizzie as they quickly began calling her, had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray-blue eyes. She was a happy, healthy baby who seemed to sense from the beginning how loved she was. As Lizzie grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. With Victoria's help and organizational skills, Ethan was able to expand his operations just as he had dreamed. They hired 2 full-time ranch hands and built additional structures to accommodate the growing herd. The ranch became known throughout the territory for the quality of its beef and horses, and they were able to command good prices for their stock. But despite their growing prosperity, Victoria and Ethan never forgot where they had come from or how much they had overcome to build their life together. They were generous with their neighbors, always ready to help someone in need. They became advocates for women and children in difficult situations, quietly helping where they could and speaking out against injustice when necessary. Word eventually reached them that Silas Morton had died, his liver finally giving out as Victoria's father's had. Neither of them felt any satisfaction in his death, only sadness that he had wasted his life in cruelty and drink. Ethan arranged for a simple burial for Silas, making sure he was laid to rest next to Elizabeth, not because he deserved to be near her, but because Ethan wanted to show he had finally let go of the hatred and desire for revenge that had once consumed him. "I spent too many years angry," Ethan told Victoria after the funeral. "I do not want to waste any more time on negative emotions. Life is too precious, and I have too much to be grateful for." Victoria understood. She too had learned that holding on to anger and pain only poisoned your own happiness. Better to focus on the blessings they had, the love they shared, and the future they were building together. When Lizzie was 3 years old, Victoria became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to twin boys, robust and healthy infants they named Edmond and Ellis. Ethan was overjoyed at having sons, though he was quick to assure Lizzie that she would always be his special girl. The ranch house, which had once seemed too large for just Ethan, was now filled with the noise and chaos of a growing family. Victoria often stood at the kitchen window, watching Ethan teach Lizzie how to ride or care for the horses, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built. "Can you believe this is real?" she asked Ethan one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. "Sometimes I feel like I am going to wake up and find it was all a dream." "It is real," Ethan assured her, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. "We built this together, and no one can take it away from us." "Do you ever think about that day in Seattle?" Victoria asked. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "I think about how close we came to never meeting, how different both our lives would have been if I had not been there that day. It terrifies me and humbles me at the same time." "I think about it too," Victoria said. "I think about how desperate I was, how certain I was that my life was over, and then you appeared like an angel sent to save me." "I am no angel," Ethan said with a slight laugh. "Just a man who made one good decision in his life." "The best decision," Victoria corrected, "and I will be grateful for it every day for the rest of my life." As the years passed, the Thorne family became an integral part of the community. Their ranch was prosperous, their children healthy and happy, and their love for each other only deepened with time. They weathered the challenges that came their way, droughts and harsh winters and the occasional setback, but they faced everything together as partners. Lizzie grew into a strong, independent young woman who could ride and rope as well as any of the ranch hands. The twins were mischievous but good-hearted, always finding new ways to get into trouble but quick to help when needed. Victoria and Ethan eventually welcomed 2 more children, another daughter they named Rose, and a youngest son they called James. The ranch house was expanded twice to accommodate the growing family, and eventually, a proper schoolhouse was built nearby so the children could receive an education without having to travel far. Victoria took great pride in ensuring all her children, daughters and sons alike, learned to read, write, and think critically about the world. Ethan often told his children the story of how he met their mother, though he simplified it for their young ears. He wanted them to understand the importance of standing up for what was right, of helping those in need, and of recognizing that love could be found in the most unexpected places. "Your mother," he would say, pulling Victoria close, "is the bravest, strongest woman I have ever known. She survived things that would have broken most people, and she did it with grace and dignity. I am the lucky one that she chose to love me back." Victoria would always blush when he said such things, but she never denied them. She had learned to accept his love and admiration, just as she had learned to trust in the permanence of their happiness. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Victoria by taking her back to Seattle. They had not returned to the town since their wedding, preferring to avoid the memories and the people who had witnessed Victoria's lowest moment. But Ethan wanted to reclaim that place, to replace the bad memories with good ones. They stayed at the finest hotel in the city, now a growing metropolis quite different from the rough frontier town it had been in 1876. Ethan took Victoria to dinner, to the theater, and shopping for anything her heart desired. But the most important part of the trip came when they walked together down the street where the auction had taken place. The auction block was long gone, replaced by a proper town square with a fountain and benches. The area was clean and civilized, bearing no trace of the dark event that had taken place there 2 decades earlier. "It does not hurt anymore," Victoria said, looking around at the transformed space. "I thought it might, but it does not. That girl who stood here, so scared and alone, she feels like someone else entirely." "She was someone else," Ethan said, taking her hand. "She became you, the woman who built a life and a family, who turned pain into strength. I am proud of you, Victoria. Proud of everything you have overcome and everything you have become." Victoria turned to her husband, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, and kissed him right there in the public square. She did not care who saw or what they thought. She wanted the world to know that she was loved, that she had triumphed over the circumstances that had once threatened to destroy her. They returned to the ranch rejuvenated, ready to face whatever the future held. Their children were growing up, starting to think about their own futures and dreams. Lizzie had met a young rancher from a neighboring property and seemed quite smitten. The twins were talking about starting their own cattle operation someday. Rose wanted to become a teacher, and young James showed an aptitude for working with horses that reminded everyone of his father. Victoria and Ethan watched their children's lives unfold with pride and joy, always ready to offer guidance but careful not to control. They had learned from their own experiences that life was unpredictable, that sometimes the best things came from the most unexpected places, and that the only way to truly live was to face each day with courage and an open heart. As they grew older, their love did not diminish but rather transformed into something even deeper and more abiding. They were partners in every sense of the word, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodnight, still found moments to steal away for private conversations and quiet intimacy. One evening, when they were in their 50s, and the children were all grown with families of their own, Victoria and Ethan sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. The ranch was now run primarily by their sons and some trusted employees, giving Victoria and Ethan more time to simply enjoy each other's company. "You have any regrets?" Victoria asked, a question that had been on her mind lately as she reflected on their life together. Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret that I could not save Elizabeth," he finally said. "That will always haunt me, at least a little, but I have learned to live with it, to accept that some things are beyond our control. What about you?" "I regret the years I wasted being afraid," Victoria said. "Afraid of my father's debts, afraid of what people thought of me, afraid to hope for something better. But then I met you, and you taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it." "We taught each other that," Ethan corrected gently. "You were already courageous, Victoria. You just needed someone to remind you of it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped together, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The ranch that Ethan had built in his grief and loneliness was now a thriving legacy, home to multiple generations of family. "Thank you," Victoria said suddenly. "For what?" Ethan asked, turning to look at her. "For seeing me that day, for bidding on my contract, for setting me free, for loving me, for giving me this life, for everything." Ethan smiled, that warm, genuine smile that still made Victoria's heart skip a beat even after all these years. "I think I am the one who should be thanking you. You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." "We saved each other," Victoria said simply, "and that is the greatest gift of all." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Victoria and Ethan remained on their porch, two souls who had found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light. Their story, which had begun with desperation and fear on a rainy day in Seattle, had transformed into a testament to the power of love, courage, and redemption. The auction block was long gone, destroyed and forgotten by history. But what had been built on the ruins of that terrible moment endured. A family, a legacy, and a love that would outlast them both, carried forward in the hearts and memories of all those whose lives they had touched. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Victoria and Ethan aged gracefully, their hair turning silver and their faces gaining the lines that come from years of laughter and weathering life's storms together. They remained active and engaged with their growing family, which now included not just children and grandchildren, but great-grandchildren as well. The ranch had been divided among their children, each running their own section but working together as a family enterprise. The Thorne name had become synonymous with quality and integrity throughout Washington state. People came from far and wide to purchase their horses and cattle, and the family's reputation for fair dealing and honest work was known throughout the territory. Lizzie, their eldest, had married her rancher and raised 4 children of her own. She had inherited her mother's organizational skills and her father's way with horses, and her section of the ranch was particularly successful in breeding quality stock. The twins, Edmund and Ellis, had indeed started their own cattle operation on adjacent land, but they maintained close ties with the family ranch and often collaborated on large sales to the army and other bulk buyers. Rose had fulfilled her dream of becoming a teacher, running the schoolhouse that had been built near the ranch and educating not just her own family's children, but those of neighboring families as well. She had married a kind doctor who had moved to the area from back east, and together they had made great strides in improving health care and education in their corner of Washington. James, the baby of the family, had taken over the primary management of the original ranch, working alongside his aging father and learning everything Ethan could teach him about running the operation. He had married a spirited young woman from Seattle who had adapted to ranch life with enthusiasm, and they were raising their own brood of children on the land, Ethan had first claimed all those years ago. Victoria took great joy in her role as matriarch of this sprawling family. She was the keeper of stories, the one who remembered everyone's birthday, the one who hosted the large family gatherings that happened regularly. Her kitchen was always open, her advice freely given, her love abundantly shared. Ethan, though no longer able to do the hard physical labor of ranching, remained active in planning and decision-making. He spent his days teaching his grandchildren and great-grandchildren about horses, telling them stories of the old days, and sitting on his beloved porch watching the land he had worked so hard to tame and cultivate. One day in late summer, when they were both in their early 70s, Victoria found Ethan in the stable, standing in front of the stall that housed one of their oldest horses, a mare that had been a foal when Ethan first bought the ranch. "She is getting old," Ethan said as Victoria came to stand beside him. "Like us. She has had a good life," Victoria observed. "Well cared for, valued, loved. That is all any of us can hope for." Ethan turned to look at his wife, and Victoria saw tears in his eyes. "I want you to know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that every day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, even the days when we struggled and fought and barely made it through. All of it was worth it because I got to spend it with you." Victoria felt her own eyes filling with tears. "Why does this sound like goodbye?" she asked, though her voice remained steady. "Not goodbye," Ethan assured her, pulling her into his arms. "Never goodbye. Just making sure you know, in case I do not say it enough, how much you mean to me, how much you have always meant to me." "I know," Victoria whispered against his chest. "I have always known, and I hope you know the same about how I feel about you." "I do," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. "I have never doubted it, not for a single moment." They stood together in the stable, two people who had weathered decades together, holding each other in the peaceful silence that only comes from truly knowing and being known by another person. As autumn approached again, bringing with it the crispness in the air that signaled the changing seasons, the family gathered at the main ranch house for what had become an annual tradition, the harvest celebration. It was a time when all the Thornes came together to celebrate another successful year, to give thanks for their blessings, and to strengthen the bonds that tied them all together. The house was filled to bursting with people, children running through the rooms, adults catching up on each other's lives, babies being passed from one doting relative to another. Victoria had spent days preparing food with the help of her daughters and daughters-in-law, and the long tables were groaning under the weight of roasted meats, fresh vegetables, pies, and breads. Ethan stood at the head of the main table, raising his glass for the traditional toast that opened the feast. His hands shook slightly with age, but his voice was strong and clear. "To family," he said, looking around at all the faces gathered there, each one precious to him. "To the bonds that tie us together, stronger than any rope or chain. To love, which conquers all obstacles and endures all hardships, and to hope, which brought your grandmother and me together all those years ago and has sustained us through everything since. To family." Everyone echoed, raising their glasses. As they all drank, Victoria caught Ethan's eye across the table and smiled. She saw in his face the same wonder she felt, the amazement that they had built all this, created all these lives and connections from nothing more than a chance encounter, and a decision to do the right thing. After the meal, as was tradition, the younger children begged for stories. They gathered around Ethan's chair on the porch, looking up at him with wide, eager eyes. "Tell us how you met Grandma," one of the great-grandchildren pleaded, as if they had not heard the story dozens of times before. Ethan glanced at Victoria, who nodded her permission. The story had been softened over the years, The darker elements glossed over to make it suitable for young ears, but the core remained true. "Well," Ethan began, settling into his chair with Victoria by his side. "It was a rainy day in Seattle, back in 1876. I was just a young cowboy, not much older than your parents are now, and I had come to town for supplies. But something made me stop and pay attention to what was happening in the town square. There was a young woman there who needed help, and I decided I was going to be the one to help her." "Was it love at first sight?" one of the girls asked romantically. Ethan considered the question. "I think it was recognition at first sight. I recognized that she was someone special, someone worth fighting for. The love came later as I got to know her and realized just how extraordinary she was. Your grandmother is the strongest, bravest person I have ever known, and I fall in love with her more every single day." Victoria blushed, even after all these years, and swatted playfully at his arm. "You are embarrassing me in front of the children." "Good," Ethan said with a grin. "They should know how amazing their grandmother is." The children giggled, delighting in the obvious affection between their grandparents. It was a gift they did not yet fully appreciate. Seeing what true, lasting love looked like, understanding that romance did not end with a wedding but continued and deepened throughout a lifetime. As the sun set on another perfect day, the family began to disperse, returning to their own homes and sections of the ranch. Victoria and Ethan remained on the porch, as they did so many evenings, watching the sky change colors and enjoying the peace that came with the end of a good day. "It has been a good life," Victoria said quietly. "The best," Ethan agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been there that day? If you had not bid on my contract?" "I try not to," Ethan admitted. "The thought of you ending up with Sela's, or in any situation where you were not safe and loved, it is unbearable. I choose to believe that somehow, some way we would have found each other. The universe could not be so cruel as to keep us apart." "I like that thought," Victoria said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The idea that we were meant to be together, that nothing could have prevented it." "We were meant to be together," Ethan said with certainty. "Everything in my life, all the pain and loss and wandering, it was all leading me to that moment in Seattle. To you." They sat together as darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one in the vast sky above. Inside the house, a lamp burned in the window, a beacon of warmth and welcome. The ranch, their legacy, stretched out around them in every direction, a testament to what could be built from love and determination. Victoria and Ethan lived several more years, blessed with continued good health and the joy of watching their family continue to grow and thrive. They remained devoted to each other until the very end, never losing the spark that had brought them together or the deep friendship that had sustained them through decades. When Ethan finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Victoria holding his hand, the entire community mourned the loss of a good man. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot he had chosen years earlier because of its beautiful view of the mountains. Victoria lived for 5 more years after Ethan's death, surrounded by her loving family but missing her partner every single day. She spent those years writing down the full story of their life together, wanting to preserve not just the sanitized version they had told the children, but the real, honest truth of where they had come from and what they had overcome. When she passed away quietly one spring morning, sitting in the chair on the porch where she and Ethan had spent so many evenings together, her children found the completed manuscript. Reading it brought tears to their eyes as they finally understood the full extent of their parents' journey from desperation to triumph. Victoria was buried next to Ethan on the hill, and their headstone bore a simple inscription that captured the essence of their relationship. Ethan Thorne, 1851–1929, and Victoria Ramsey Thorne, 1854–1934. Together they built a legacy of love. In life and in death, they were never parted. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their children and grandchildren, each generation adding their own contributions while maintaining the values that Ethan and Victoria had instilled. Hard work, integrity, compassion, and family above all else. The story of how they met, the full version that Victoria had written down, became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through the generations as a reminder that love could bloom in the darkest circumstances, and that one act of courage could change the course of countless lives. In time, the Thorne Ranch became one of the most respected operations in Washington state, known not just for the quality of their livestock, but for their commitment to treating everyone fairly and standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves. It was a living tribute to the principles that Ethan had demonstrated on that rainy day in Seattle, when he chose to bid on a stranger's contract simply because it was the right thing to do. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, two souls who had found each other against all odds were together still. Their love proved eternal by the family and legacy they left behind. The auction block where their story began had long since turned to dust, but what they had built together endured. Proof that from the darkest beginnings could come the brightest endings, and that love, when true and deep and freely given, could conquer anything. The great-great-grandchildren of Ethan and Victoria Thorne still work the ranch to this day, still tell the story of their extraordinary ancestors, still strive to live up to the example set more than a century ago. The land has been passed down through careful stewardship, the values through intentional teaching, and the love through the simple act of gathering together as family and remembering where they came from. Every autumn, during the harvest celebration that has continued unbroken for generations, someone reads from Victoria's manuscript, reminding the family of the courage it took to build what they now enjoy. And every time the story is told, there are tears in the eyes of the listeners as they remember that they are the living proof of a love that refused to be defeated by circumstance, poverty, or despair. The story of Ethan and Victoria Thorne became more than just family history. It became a legend in the region, a testament to the best of what the frontier could produce. People who were willing to stand up for what was right, who saw past the surface to recognize the worth in another human being, and who understood that true strength came not from dominance, but from compassion. In the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, generations of Thornes are now buried, but the two graves at the center, those of Ethan and Victoria, remain the heart of it all. Visitors to the ranch, whether family or friends or those who come seeking to learn about the region's history, always make the pilgrimage to that hilltop to pay their respects to the couple whose love story had started it all. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blows just right through the pines, some say you can still feel their presence there on the porch of the old ranch house. Not as ghosts haunting the place, but as the embodiment of the love and joy that had filled that home for so many years. The house itself is now preserved as a historical site, maintained by the family as a museum of sorts, showing visitors what life was like in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But more than showcasing historical artifacts, it tells a story. The story of a woman who was sold like property but refused to let that define her. The story of a man who chose compassion over indifference and love over loneliness. The story of two people who built something beautiful from broken pieces and proved that redemption was always possible. The manuscript Victoria wrote in her final years was eventually published by one of her great-grandchildren who worked in New York as an editor. It became a modest bestseller, introducing the story of Ethan and Victoria to people far beyond Washington state. Readers around the country were moved by the tale of love and courage, and many made the journey west to see the ranch and pay their respects. The book's success led to the ranch becoming a destination for those seeking inspiration, for couples looking to remember why they fell in love, for individuals trying to find the courage to face their own challenges. The family, while protective of their privacy, opened the grounds for tours on certain days, using the opportunity to share not just history but values, treating people with dignity, standing up against injustice, choosing courage over comfort. As the decades passed and the 21st century arrived, the Thorne Ranch adapted to modern times while maintaining its core character. Solar panels were installed on the barn roofs, modern veterinary care improved the health of the livestock, and computers helped with record keeping. But the essence remained unchanged. This was a place built on love, maintained through hard work, and dedicated to proving that the circumstances of your beginning do not have to determine your ending. The youngest generation of Thornes, those who never had the privilege of meeting Ethan and Victoria but grew up hearing their story, carry the legacy forward with pride. They understand that they are the inheritors not just of land and property, but of a philosophy of life that values people over profit, integrity over expedience, and love above all else. On the anniversary of Ethan and Victoria's wedding each year, the family gathers not for a harvest celebration, but for a renewal of vows ceremony. Couples in the family, whether newly married or wed for decades, stand together and recommit to their partnerships, inspired by the example set by their ancestors. It is a reminder that love is not just a feeling but a choice, made fresh each day, to honor and cherish the person you have chosen to share your life with. The ceremony always concludes at the graves on the hilltop, where the entire family stands together in silence for a moment, acknowledging the debt they owe to two people who refuse to let circumstances destroy their chance at happiness. Then, as the sun sets over the mountains that Ethan and Victoria loved so much, someone always says the same words: "Thank you for showing us the way. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your love. We will carry it forward," and they do. Every single day, in countless small ways and occasional large ones, the descendants of Ethan and Victoria Thorne carry forward the legacy of that rainy day in Seattle when a cowboy made a choice that changed everything. They carry it in how they treat their employees, with respect and fair wages. They carry it in how they interact with their neighbors, always ready to help those in need. They carry it in how they raise their children, teaching them that every person has inherent worth regardless of their circumstances. The auction block is long gone, crumbled to dust and forgotten by all but a few historians. But what rose from that terrible moment has endured for generations, and will endure for generations more. A family built on love, a ranch built on integrity, and a story that reminds us all that it only takes one person choosing compassion over indifference to change the course of history. Ethan Thorne could never have imagined, when he raised his hand and bid $300 for a stranger's freedom, that he was setting in motion a legacy that would touch thousands of lives and endure for more than a century. He was simply doing what he believed was right, standing up for someone who needed help, honoring his sister's memory by ensuring another woman would not suffer as she had. Victoria Ramsey could never have imagined, standing terrified on that auction block, that she was moments away from meeting the love of her life, from building a family and a legacy that would become legendary. She was simply trying to survive, to endure whatever came next, to maintain some shred of dignity in the face of dehumanizing circumstances. But together, they created something magical. Together, they proved that love could bloom in the darkest places, that courage came in many forms, that redemption was always possible for those willing to reach for it. Together, they built a life worth living and a story worth telling, generation after generation after generation. And that, perhaps, is the greatest legacy of all. Not the ranch, not the wealth, not even the large and loving family, but the simple truth that when two people choose each other, when they commit to building something together, when they refuse to let circumstances define them, they can create ripples that spread far beyond anything they could have imagined. The story that began with despair on a rainy autumn day in Seattle in 1876 became a story of hope that echoes through time, reminding us all that we are never beyond saving, never beyond loving, never beyond the possibility of transformation. And sometimes, just sometimes, the worst day of your life turns out to be the beginning of your happily ever after.